Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. Welcome back, friends, to the 4th Box podcast. It's been a couple weeks since me and Paul were here together, but at last, we're back in a normal routine. How's it going, Pops? Good to have you back.
Good. Well, it's great to be back, all refreshed from a little time away. I believe it is our 121st episode. I could be wrong, but I believe that's where we're at.
Sounds right to me.
Yeah, so it's good to be back and joining everybody. We certainly are welcoming all of our listeners from around the country and elsewhere back to the 4th Box studio for our podcast. I wanted to mention, I thought you did a great job talking about the Buckman Tavern last week when you were on with Brad, among other things. But it's great to be back. I have a list of toast tonight.
Oh, good. Since we almost missed ours last week, I'm glad to hear there'll be a catch-up on that.
You did. You almost missed it, and Brant caught it right at the end. So it was a little bit out of the normal sequence, but we like to mix things up a little bit. So my first toast, and tonight I have what is called Jameson Triple Triple.
Ooh.
Really smooth tasting Irish whiskey, so I'm going to enjoy that. And for my toast tonight, first and foremost, I want to toast you and Brant for a job well done on the show last week. I really enjoyed it. I've listened to it several times. In fact, maybe we'll talk about a few things that you guys discussed.
Yeah.
I also want to toast Paul, who is a longtime friend and listener, supporter, who comes by and drops off a little monetary donation now and then. Paul has had some health issues. So I am raising my glass tonight to Paul as well and saluting him and wishing for a very speedy recovery for Paul. I did get to see him today.
Oh, yeah. Sorry to hear. Hoping the best for him, for sure.
Yep. And then lastly, Thomas Massie seems to be the only one in Congress who is pushing significantly to keep the Epstein discussion to the forefront. There was a thing called the Transparency Act, Epstein File Transparency Act, that was signed into law that requires all files be released, and the only redaction can be for the victims. And he is the only one largely that continues to push this despite all the other background noise. We have shooting attempts or whatever that theater was. We have the ongoing Ukraine, Iran discussions. There's always a lot of drama, but Thomas Massie, I'm saluting him tonight as well to continue to push, because I think you guys touched on it last week that, there's just too many intersecting points with the groups that are involved in all of these other things and that inner group at the Epstein circle. So we really need to get to the bottom of that. So a salute to Thomas Massie.
Yeah, cheers.
And then, Bria, I guess you're queuing us up for the quote tonight, which is cool. Another little shift of gears.
Yeah, we're going to change things up. So, yeah, I've got the quote for tonight. I'm actually going to try to play it so that we hear the speaker say the quote himself. I think it's just going to be more impactful. This is actually a quote from Edward Snowden, which I think is going to be just a really important voice to hear from with the discussion that we're going to have tonight. So let me go ahead and try to do that.
The greatest fear that I have regarding the outcome for America of these disclosures is that nothing will change. people will see in the media all of these disclosures. They'll know the lengths that the government is going to grant themselves powers unilaterally to create greater control over American society and global society. But they won't be willing to take the risks necessarily to stand up and fight to change things, to force their representatives to actually take a stand in their interests. And the months ahead, the years ahead, it's only going to get worse.
So that was recorded in 2012, and it's pretty apparent to me, and I'm sure to you, that Edward's worst fear came true. All of the things that he disclosed, that he worked to disclose, and people like him about the control mechanisms, the surveillance that was happening and that would continue to happen, nothing changed, and it's only gotten worse since then. So yeah, that was the quote. Before we dive into the conversation tonight, which is going to be really an in-depth look at Palantir, and that's why I wanted to play this quote in particular, because we keep hearing the words Palantir. We've mentioned it on a lot of episodes, but I think there is such confusion about what Palantir even is. And I understand that because it does sort of feel like they popped up out of nowhere. So tonight we want to give the opportunity to allow our listeners to have like a really good understanding of who they are, what they're doing. And in truth, there's only so much that we can know. So we'll share what we're able. But that's going to be the bulk of the episode. But before we do that, I just want to turn it back over to you for any talking points that you wanted to jump in on from last week or anything else before we get started.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. I think a lot of it will be very relevant to this discussion because you guys were talking about privacy. You guys were talking about what appears to be societal disillusion, unawareness, and all those sorts of things. But before that, I did want to mention, as we take a look at our moment in history, I do have a first week of May event. This is really curious. In the first week of May in 1776, Rhode Island, of all places, was the first colony to renounce its allegiance to King George III. And that happened the very first week. Now, there was a kind of a cascade of other colonies that began after that. But Rhode Island, which was really made up with some what was deemed to be religious radicals out of the Massachusetts colony, but they were the very first ones. And oddly enough, another point of interest, they were the last colony to ratify, to sign on to the Constitution 14 years later. So that was our moment in history, 1776. Rhode Island took the step to renounce its allegiance to King George.
Cool, yeah, great share.
Yeah, but then a couple of things you guys had talked about last week. And again, I thought you did a great job on that show. I liked Brant's analogy of our Super Bowl week. Relating to Patriots Day, April 19th. I thought that was really cool. And he was also talking about the society's comprehension or awareness. And we're going to talk about some things tonight that I think many, many people have disengaged themselves from, trying to stay awake, aware of what is going on. I think you guys touched on it. It seems like it's a lot easier just to go along with what you're being spoon-fed than to start accepting this idea that everything is a lie. I think there's some fear there. There's some distraction we've always talked about. You know, we've had the White House Correspondents' Dinner thing go on, which who knows what that was. I don't trust anything coming out of Washington, D.C. We have the ongoing nonsense in Iran, in the Middle East, with so many Trump supporters still clinging to his current agenda, which is exactly opposite of what it was during campaign season. You guys touched on that a little bit. And one of the points that came to my mind when you guys were talking and I was listening to it is, we used to send a thing or one of those cartoon things around every so often. It said you either trust government or you know history. And I think a lot of people are content trusting government yet because they don't realize that they have been being squeezed into a box with less and less and less liberty. Because as you guys pointed out last week, they can stop and get a popsicle on the way home. They can go home and flip their Netflix on, and all is well in the world. But really, as you pointed out, with the tariff discussion, we paid the price. We, the little guy, the consumer on the very bottom end, we paid the price. And now they're going to take our tax dollars and reward those companies that benefited from us paying an elevated price. And, it's these sorts of things that we're hopeful will make people aware of how badly we are being fleeced by the people that they put their trust in. But I think, as you've mentioned on previous occasions, we still come down to that 80-20 thing. And 80% are probably not ever going to wake up until somebody's kicking their door in. And then they're going to be hollering for help. And why didn't we know this was coming and all that sort of thing. Another thing that I think factors into that is the powers that be that want to use what we're going to talk about tonight, these privacy stealing entities that are feeding every bit of information that they can glean off of you from your computer, from your phone, from all of your e-devices, and they can control and steer your life based on the information that they're gathering from us. But I think it's human nature to be lazy. And if we can find somebody else to carry our load for us, I think that is human nature. And I think the people that are evil and trying to take from the many and give to the few, which is what's going on, they recognize human nature and they have co-opted it to work to their benefit. So they know people are lazy. They keep us divided. You guys talked about that. Another great point. The division is nurtured. It's fostered. It's fanned every day, every issue. They fan that division because they know that as long as we're divided, we are never focused on them. We are so busy pointing fingers at each other. We're missing the whole target, and they continue to plunder us as a result of us being caught up in this falsehood, these tidbits that they throw out to keep us feuding amongst ourselves. So I thought you guys did a great job touching on those things. Just a couple more here, brief. Brent had made a remark, and I thought it was really good, that we're not going to perfect humanity. So the use of AI, maybe it's convenient, and that is how they suck us into a lot of these traps, is through convenience. Oh, they're making our life easier. Yeah, it's made easier, but now you don't have a job. So how easy did they really make it? That's what we have to start looking at, is at the bottom line. And the other thing you guys talked about that was really great that spun off of that was the universal high income. And anybody that can buy into this, if everybody is universally high income, then everybody's poor, everybody's the same. So it really doesn't matter. The only way wealth is established is when you create a good or a service that somebody else wants, and then you can then be paid for it. And if it's something that somebody wants to a greater degree, they would pay a higher. That's how wealth's established, by generation of goods and services that somebody want. Not, well, we're going to have robots do all of our work for us, and we can all sit around and collect $1 million. From who? From where? Where does the wealth become derived from? And as you guys said, and it was so point on, anybody that gets caught up in believing this is so naive. We're just going to sit home and get checks in the mail. Well, then those checks are worth nothing. If nobody is out establishing and creating wealth, then they're worth nothing. So I thought that was great. One of the things that I forgot why I come around to this point, but one of the points I wanted to make was, and we talked about it before, I think the whole COVID thing really set us up for a lot of these other things that have come later. It sets us up for starting a war when we said we wouldn't. It sets us up for just going along with Palantir and other agencies that were private to begin with. Now they're funded by government dollars because government dollars are used to glean the information from them to steer us. Now, the people that were made extremely wealthy by coming up with these kind of platforms and things that everybody runs off and participates in are wealthy enough that they control the legislative body to write the checks to them to provide the services. It's a vicious circle at the top. And we are the only thing that we get out of it is more rules and regulations on our life and the theft of our wealth. Why do we participate? And you guys discussed that very, very thing. You know, COVID taught us when there's a threat, we're supposed to run home and hide and cower in place and put on our mask and our helmet and our face shield and our steel-toed boots and everything else. But in the days this country was founded, they had a thing called committees of safety. They had things called the committee or the militia. And then when there was a threat approaching your community, you didn't run into your house and put on your mask and cower beneath your bed. You grabbed your pitchfork and your axe and your musket, and you went out to the city limit and you met the threat there and chased it on down the road. So this whole morphing of society into cowering and I think this was all part of the exercise of the COVID thing. And we're seeing a lot of that, more of that come to pass now with this never ending snooping that goes on into our lives. And you guys did a really great job last week discussing a lot of those points. I just wanted to go back over them. I had a remark I'd have loved to have been part of that discussion when you guys were going through, but I had a lot of great thoughts come out of that as I was listening to you guys. And perhaps someday we'll all three get on together. But great job again. Just a couple of points I wanted to go back and touch on.
Yeah, for sure. I think Brant definitely is happy to join us again. And it was a good conversation that took a lot of turns that, you know, sometimes you don't know where they're going to end up, but it was well-rounded. And, you know, you're right in kind of closing those notes with the COVID discussion and the way that it did sort of condition us to accept these things like Palantir. And, you know, Palantir is one of many sort of tech giants, but it's the one that seems to be taking the most control over the most government agencies, which is it should be concerning to us.
Yep.
So if nothing else, let's just go ahead and get right into this conversation then. And thank you for, you know, the notes and compliments from last week. We missed you, but it was a good chat for sure. So one thing I just wanted to quickly mention, and you already did, was the shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And it's not because I have really anything to say or any real poignant thoughts on it, because as soon as it happened, I think I had the same thought that most everyone had, which was this just feels like utter bullshit. And you see so much bullshit that you become conditioned to that too. And you just, you know, you didn't even matter. I mean, how many times are we going to try to assassinate this guy? Like, okay, we saw it once and it was shocking. We saw it a second time. It was shocking. We're seeing it a third time and everyone's kind of like, I'm over this. Like, yeah. What's going on? And also there's just been so much weirdness with everything else that's gone on. I mean, everything that happened in Butler, right? There's so many unanswered questions. Everything that happened with Charlie Kirk, so many unanswered questions. All the questions that are valid are getting pushed to the side, getting completely canceled. All the questions that are nonsensical are the ones that anyone with any sense of authority seems to be chasing. So when something like this happens, we go, okay, who cares? Because the questions that you're going to ask aren't the questions that matter, and we already all know that. The only reason that I wanted to bring it up to start the episode was because something that was strange, and I don't know what the rest of the internet looked like outside of social media, but on social media, there was an almost instantaneous response from all of your standard, you know, typical mega influencers, all of the ones that seem to jump on all the same trends, all the ones who have been paid off by Israel to promote certain ideas. They all came out with very similar rhetoric to note that, hey, this is the reason that we need that ballroom. We got to get the ballroom built. These are the security reasons. You know, the whole thing was the kibosh was put on the ballroom because there was no justification for security purposes. Well, a week and some change later, this happens. And then all of a sudden, the entire mega internet explodes and goes, oh, we got to get the ballroom built now. And, you know, to me, that felt weird because there's something not quite right about the ballroom, which, you know, a couple months ago, I just thought, whatever, who cares about this? Because Trump claimed this was all going to be fully funded from private donations. So, you know, whatever, I don't care. I don't have any deep tie to the building itself. If we're making changes to it, fine, you know. But now it sounds like they need $400 million worth of taxpayer dollars to get this thing going, but they've already accepted millions of dollars worth of donations. So where are the donations and where is the $400 million going? Like, there's already something weird there. And again, a lot of the people who did donate, a lot of the companies, it just gave you a kind of a weird feeling. And one of them was Palantir. So that whole situation is directly tied to the Palantir conversation because it goes to show how interconnected all of this stuff is. It all feels very different and disconnected. You know, you have the White House Correspondent Dinner and nowhere in your mind are you thinking about Palantir. Mm-hmm. But there is a connection there. And those connections are very important when we have conversations like these and when we're seeking truth. Because the connections mean something. And it's hard for us on the outside to speculate. But we should be paying attention to them, you know?
I think, again, I always go back to this COVID thing. I think it was a test balloon. I think they were establishing what the parameters were for getting away with absurdities. And I think they are still very comfortable knowing that they can get away with absurdities because there's no political blowback because the majority accepts the bullshit. The majority accepts we had to go to war with Iran. They were 2 weeks away from having a nuclear weapon, which is something that's been said, for 40 years. But now we just bombed them and wiped it out, sent it back for 50 years. But half a year later, they're 2 weeks away again. And the majority, which is so symbolic of what happened to me, that's what it appears to be during COVID, is that they recognized this was such a lesson for them to know that we can absolve ourselves from any political pressure because the majority is going to buy the bullshit. And I immediately, like you, questioned this whole thing that went on. It looks like don't tell me that they're going to have all the cabinet members in one location, which is a complete breach of security. Anybody knows that. We're not going to put everybody in. And then if you have the president and the VP and various cabinet members and other high-ranking officials all tucked into one room, don't tell me that there's one checkpoint with a little folding table and a couple of guys standing around. I just cannot. And you sell this bullshit to the public and we accept it. A guy can just roll up in off the street and get within 50 yards of that building before anybody is checking anything. And there's a little table there, which he runs right past. And by the way, if you listen to somebody like former CIA operative Larry Johnson or any of these guys talk about it, he said, when the guy's laying on the floor, he was not shot. He wasn't shot. There was no blood. There was no EMTs working on him. There was nothing. It was all theater.
Yeah.
So, yep, the Iran war had taken a turn south. There was more and more voices coming out in opposition, strong opposition to the Iran war. The ballroom had stalled. There's all these things that all of a sudden now we have a big theatrical display. And everybody is just supposed to refocus and jump back on the bandwagon. That's the kind of thing that I think, more so to keep. Let's keep the MAGA thing as intact as possible because Israel has gotten away with what they've gotten away with, and there's been no blowback. So let's kind of put an end to that. So this is the way I look at it, and I just can't help but getting frustrated, and you and I have talked about it. There's no sense in it. We know the number we're going to have. The rest are blind sheep, going to follow that thing right off the cliff if that's where it goes, because it is too big of a thing to lift up the covers and recognize that you've been lied to on almost every front.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, an episode in itself, really, if you want to get into everything that happened there. And like I said, we don't, but it's worth touching on because there's too many dots that connect with one another. So let's get into the big question. I've got a big long outline for us to get through, so I will try to get through it and then kind of defer to you, and we'll go back and forth that way. So, who is Palantir? In their own words, on their own website, which can be a little bit annoying to kind of flip through, but eventually you can find some actual, like, real mission statements and stuff, not just flashy videos. One of the things that this says is our software powers real-time AI-driven decisions in critical government and commercial enterprises in the West, from the factory floors to the front lines. Now, right off the rip, that screams to me military-industrial complex. And there's a lot of talk about the West and protecting and defending the West and Western culture and Western nations on their site. But even from the factory floors to the front lines, that is war talk. I mean, that's what it is. And I think it's just an interesting thing to consider here going into this, because people think of Palantir as a tech company or as a data company or as a software company, but they're a war company. They're a defense company. You know, we shouldn't really be thinking about them any differently than we think of Boeing or Raytheon. Not really. This is their own words. So, yes, of course they're a tech and they're a data and they're a software company. Yes, but they're also this, and this is what's most important to them. So that's important to remember here. That's like what their mission is about. Moving on from that, what does the word Palantir mean? So some of you may have already heard this. I'm hoping this is new to some of you. It comes from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and it's actually the name for one of the Elvish seeing stones, meaning those that watch from afar. So there's actually a lot of things kind of within the Palantir universe and within the Peter Thiel universe that are Lord of the Rings related. They pull a lot of names from that, and it's interesting because that story, it really gives us a lot of warnings about what people with this type of power can and will do every time. So that in itself should be, you know, it's kind of that predictive programming thing where it's like the clue is right in front of us. So whether or not we can see that is up to us. Before I get into the history of how it began, anything you want to comment on so far?
Yeah, the only other thing that it does have connections to so many government agencies that are involved with war. But one of the other primary things I would suggest that their mission is to fleece through the government taxpayers' dollars. They're involved with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the CIA, the FBI, the Border Patrol, all kind of Department of Education, all kind of U.S. government agencies are dropping not thousands, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars into Palantir. So this is where you can see the people like Zuckerbergs and Thiels and all of these. They set the agenda because they own Congress, they own the courts, and they own the presidency. So, in addition to the Israeli influence, here is another group, maybe homegrown, maybe there's Israel influence there as well. But what it seems ultimately they're doing is taking hundreds of millions and billions of taxpayers' dollars, providing some service back to the government to put better control, more stringent controls and snooping over the top of we, the citizens, and we are cheering for it. Oh, look how wonderful. They're helping us be better farmers. They're helping the schools become better educators. No, they're not. No, they're not. They are helping the government become more efficient at controlling you, and we're paying for it and cheering for it. That is what's hard to fathom. But anyway, Not to get you off course. That's what I got.
It's okay. Yeah, you're jumping ahead a little bit. We're going to get into that stuff and into the different components of who they're giving money or who they're getting money from and all these things. But
Good.
This is in their own words, right? This is what they're selling to us. And I actually went and listened to a couple podcasts, brief conversations, because he doesn't appear often, of Alex Karp, just to hear the way that he talks. And he's a weird guy, and he said a lot of weird things. We're going to get into a lot of his stuff too. But the one thing that's pretty tough about him, just kind of going into, who they sell themselves as. Alex Karp is the current CEO, and one of the co-founders. He really talks about himself and the mission as a pro-America guy and company, insists that Palantir is an anti-surveillance company. Everything he says, it's well scripted. I mean, it's what you want to hear. And if you don't know any better, you listen to the guy and you think, wow, this guy has good ideas. And of course, all the evil ones kind of have that skill of, right, like the charisma and saying the right thing, and he does. So again, just kind of something to plug in there. Important if you go and try and research him at all, his ideas are truly psychopathic, but the way that he talks does not allude to that. The way that he talks is smooth, it's crisp, and it's what the American patriot would want to hear from somebody who has such a role in our government. So these are just the things that we have to be looking for, and this is where that discernment skill really is important. But let's just move right into the history of the company before we sidebar too much. So Palantir was co-founded in 2003 by Peter Thiel, by Alex Karp, a couple others. Interestingly, this was around the same time that the United States Total Information Awareness Program, headed by DARPA, was defunded over privacy fears. So this was a program that existed, and it was very similar to what Palantir is doing today. It was the idea of basically combining all the information that we had on different citizens into profiles. So we had all the information about them so that we understood, their whereabouts, their purchasing habits. We're able to predict crime to some extent. This was all something that was going on back in the early 2000s, headed by DARPA. And the people found out about it, were furious. Congress defunded the program. Almost within that same time frame, we have the creation of Palantir, which is in part funded by the CIA's venture capital fund, In-Q-Tel. Now, I think we could do a whole episode on In-Q-Tel, because why does the CIA have a venture capital fund? Why are they... I mean, this implies like private equity. That's what venture capital is, I think, inherently. I'm not an expert in this category, but I think that's what it's supposed to mean, is private equity funding. It's not private if it's the CIA. The CIA is using our money. That's not private at all. That's the opposite of private. And yet we don't have any say in what they're funding and why they're funding these certain companies. So, okay, let's, who knows, was Palantir stood up because of the CIA? I can't confirm or deny that, but certainly the CIA played a role in them getting their start. Now, to me, what this tells me is the government knew they could no longer use this Total Information Awareness Program to collect the data, so now they needed to outsource it to a contractor. It's the same as war crimes. When our army or our Marines want to do some really shady shit that would break international law, they send in the guys from BlackRock. They don't send in the army, they just send in military contractors. And now they can get it done without getting dirt on their hands. It's the same thing that they did here. And so I think that's something that, like, even just in its inception, we should be very, very aware of how it began. We should be alarmed by that. And guess who else was an early investor? Jeffrey Epstein. Good guess. Of course he was. I think somewhere in the realm of like $40 million. So again, the dots connect. They all connect. And those connections I'll say it again, are what we need to be paying attention to. So, kind of just jumping off of all that, Palantir in its early days basically capitalized on the expansion of surveillance infrastructure in the wake of September 11th. The Patriot Act kind of gave the government the go-ahead to set up all of this infrastructure, and Palantir was right there at the ready, already well known by the CIA. So they have the ability to step right in, start taking these contracts over, and kind of help with the creation of a lot of the surveillance tech that was in use in the early days. Since then, it's only expanded into military tech and AI. Basically, this whole history it's very brief, it's very compact, but it shows us that they've been deeply involved with the government from their beginning. And honestly, the federal contracts have doubled since the beginning of Trump's second term. So they've been on the rise steadily for a little over 20 years. But since Trump took office this second time, that's when things skyrocketed. I mean, that's when they really were able to get their claws into the government in a deep, deep way. And I think that's why we're hearing it so much now where we didn't before. Palantir wasn't, I mean, it just wasn't really a company people were talking about in the surveillance space, or certainly in the, military space. But I feel like every other week there's a news story, and this is why. It's literally doubled in a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, that should be another red flag for the forever Trumpers. You have never Trumpers and you have forever Trumpers, and the forever Trumpers are those that simply refuse to accept that the guy's doing anything, out of bounds from what he said. But basically this is surveillance stuff. It is information gathering by the government now. Maybe back in 2003 at the founding of this, DARPA was probably getting some political flack. The awareness programs, or whatever they tried to make niceties out of so that they could begin their surveillance. There was enough pushback, and we were already a dozen years into pushing back against this kind of thing by then. But there was pushback to the point that they said, okay, Congress is going to defund it. But on the other hand, through less visible means, we're going to get the CIA involved with this outfit that knows how to do all this stuff, and it won't go through traditional legislation, and we'll get what we want anyway. And that's, to me, what it looks like, that whole thing. And now Trump, who appeared to be, or suggested he was, not in favor of all of this snooping into public or into private citizens' lives and monitoring every aspect, now he's funding at a greater level than had ever done before the very things, again, that he said he was opposed to. So for the forever Trumpers, if you're standing there cheering for Palantir and these other groups that are providing information to the government so that they can control and steer and condition your life, I think you've been so badly duped that you are now one of the folks that are going to make sure that we can't come out of this through traditional means, i.e. the first three boxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is where the issue with them having their hands in so many things becomes problematic for us, the people, because it allows them to do a lot of smoke and mirrors, right?
Oof.
Like they're selling what they're doing as being a necessity because we need to win this AI war against China and against our other foreign adversaries. We have to do it first. We have to do what first? First of all, what are we even talking about? Does anyone even know?
Mm-hmm.
We have to win the AI war, but what does that mean? Because I don't think the people that are saying it really know. They're just repeating a line that they've heard from the people who head Palantir. Like, that's not a good reason to buy into an idea. And because they are involved in all of these different pieces of war now, people believe that that's true, and that's it's all well-intentioned. But they are a surveillance company first, despite what Alex Karp might say on some podcast to, get him in your good favor.
Yeah.
They do a lot with all of our intelligence agencies, and that is not just for foreign people. That's not just for immigrants. The tech works the same on everybody. The tech doesn't know if I'm from here or not.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the significance of what was learned during the COVID. They know we got to come up with some buzzwords. We got to win the war with the AI. Okay, everybody, we're at war. We got to win the war. Nobody even knows what the war is, but we got to win the war, so we'll give you whatever you need to win the war. I think that's what they learned. They learned that they can just say jump and 75, 80%, it just starts hopping. They don't know what they're hopping for. They don't know what they're hopping from or where they're hopping to. But somebody said hop and they start hopping. That's what I think was learned. So they come out, they scream the scare tactic words. Hey, we're at war with China. We got to win the AI thing. We got to get there first. We got to get where? Where's the finish line? What do we got to accomplish? No, that's never divulged. But we got to do this. And while we're doing it, we're going to impart all of this stuff on you. And by the way, you're going to pay for it, and you're going to be happy about it. This is perfect. That's a perfect thing to me. All of these lessons that we see, to me, that was stuff that was learned by government agencies, Israel, all the other people that are running our lives and stealing from us and giving to the few. They learned what they can get away with. They can scream anything. All they got to do is put a little scare word in there, and the majority of the public is going to go charging after it without even looking back to see if there's a boogeyman present.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. That's what's happening here. So a lot of this stuff we've already touched on, and you mentioned it early in the show. But I'm just going to throw out some numbers and to give some more specifics of how they've been involved with the government in recent years, just kind of go through some of these things. And please keep in mind, this is a very abbreviated list because it's not easy to just pull this stuff up. Yeah, it's our money paying for it. But like everything, you can't just search like, what are all the ways Palantir's involved? Because you're never, ever going to see it all. I mean, it was hard to find a lot of these numbers, and it shouldn't be, and these aren't even, whatever. I'm getting distracted, but let's just get into the specifics.
Okay.
All right. So, just kind of going back to one of the first things that we heard about, I think a lot of people didn't know about it until later years, and this was about 2018, was when they started using the predictive policing stuff in Los Angeles and New Orleans. So the police departments there deployed Palantir's tech to guide police activity, and did end up scrapping these programs because there was a lot of public outcry there. This is where they were basically inputting years of crime data into an algorithm and were supposedly able to forecast where and who might commit future crimes. Now, I don't think I need to explain this one. Like, this is pretty clear why this is not something we want happening. Also, right off the rip, remember that they're telling us they're not a surveillance company. I'm sorry, then what even is this? Like, this is the way I would define surveillance to someone if they asked what that meant, So this is kind of early days still. Like, again, they've been around since 2003, but kind of small potatoes up until the last 5-6 years. So this is 2018. Going into April 2025, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE, of course, signed a $30 million contract with Palantir to develop a platform granting agents near real-time visibility into the movements and backgrounds of migrants. So we talked about this last year when this was kind of first coming to light. Again, I don't need to explain this. I don't think. Like, this is pretty obvious how this tech could be used on any one of us at any time. They're tracking all of the information they have on a person to understand their whereabouts so they can just go and scoop them up at any time they want because the person is illegal. And while that is part of the federal government's job to be removing illegal immigrants from this country, the way they're doing it is a breach of the Constitution. So the right to do it exists, but the way that they're doing it is not right because this tech could inadvertently tag the wrong person, right? Like, you can just accidentally be looping people who are not illegal immigrants into this by mistake. It's an algorithm. It's a computer. It doesn't have that much ability to know perfectly, right? So mistakes are guaranteed.
Right. It's based on statistics. It's just based on statistics, and not to sidebar, but 14 years before that, when I was still involved with law enforcement, we were gathering all kind of data. It was being plugged into a computer, a drug interdiction program. They knew that, say, for example, 40% of the time, the most common vehicle used by people running large amounts of drugs was a Honda Civic, and they were going to be stopped between the hours of 11 o'clock p.m. and 0400, 4 o'clock in the morning. So you automatically had created this slice that you were looking for. If you've seen a car between 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock that fit that description, you automatically had a reason to stop it. So that's the predictive nature. Now they've taken it many leaps forward because, of course, that was 40 years ago, but that was the early stages of this. So they're gathering data based on statistics and they're predicting. So now they're going to predict who and when a crime might occur. That should be very, very concerning to everybody. Their job is not to predict, it is to preserve life and to protect, which is something they don't do. Nowhere in there does it say predict.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting to hear that this, and I've heard you talk about it before. I don't know if you've brought it up on the show or not, but it is interesting to hear how long these types of ideas have been phased in. And now we're just taking this to a whole new scale by implementing AI. So moving past that, in August of last year, 2025, there was a $10 billion agreement with the Army for a software and data contract. This is basically a blanket contract where it will just allow them to have complete access to any of the softwares and kind of be able to build upon it. And this is not the first contract. Like, it was already close to $1 billion from what you can easily find that the Army has spent with Palantir before this $10 billion contract. So moving past that, in December of 2025, a $448 million deal with the Navy for Ship OS, which is just, a very innocent sounding AI tool for shipbuilding and repair. Now, on its face, that doesn't sound that egregious compared to some of the other things, but I, again, am pulling one contract. This is one, big amount of money for Palantir from a branch of the military. This is not the only money they've ever spent with Palantir. So, coming up a little bit more recent, February of 2026, the Department of Homeland Security signed a $1 billion 5-year agreement expected to expand to other agencies like the Secret Service, FEMA, TSA, and Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Same thing as the $10 billion kind of blanket contract, basically gives access to Palantir's platforms without competitive bidding. So you could go really far down the weeds with this one too. Palantir kind of has a couple staple platforms. Now, obviously, if we're looking at the Navy, the Ship OS, that's something kind of specific designed for this, but a lot of their platforms are used again and again and again, and they're implemented across agencies. So Gotham is the big one. This is basically for government and military use. It integrates and visualizes large volumes of data from enforcement databases, biometric systems, financial records, and travel data. Gotham allows analysts and operatives to identify hidden patterns, detect threats, and make high-stakes decisions rapidly. This was in part the tech that Edward Snowden came out talking about, because Gotham has been used for a long, long time. Remember, this is a 2003 company. So by the time that Edward Snowden came out in the early 2010s, Gotham was very much in use in government agencies. And it's only now that people are really starting to familiarize themselves with what it's capable of, despite his early warnings. There's also Foundry, which is basically the private sector version. It's used across all industries, including healthcare, finance, logistics, manufacturing, energy. It's basically just machine learning models, just crunching numbers, crunching history, crunching data, transactions, all these things to generate risk assessment and link analyses. It's basically used to compile data across platforms to simplify it, right? That's all it is. Very harmless on its face, but it's so much more than that. And when you recognize that all of these systems are all owned by the same people. And all of this data is living kind of in one place in that sense. That's where it becomes dangerous. Anything you want to go on so far?
Yeah. So just I want to draw an example, not that it was the biggest number, but I think you said $484 million for the Navy to come up with some program to tell them how to do and when to do maintenance. So they devised something that all of us that have been in manufacturing or running any kind of an operation have had for a long time, but they benefited $480 some million, almost $500 million, not to do the work, mind you. This is only to tell you when the work might be done. This is the ludicrousness of this whole thing. This is nothing more than fleecing the American public. This does not do any work. It gathers data and gives them to somebody who should have already been analyzing that data and telling them, well, we got to bring this ship back in for an overhaul and this one, and whatever all those pieces were. This stuff was being done. So these folks come up with some grand idea on how to do that more efficiently or whatever line of bullshit they sold, and now they're benefiting just the Department of Navy, mind you. The Army was in for a much bigger slice than the other branches, I'm sure. But the Navy, for example, had a $480 million contract to come up with the program that tells them how to take care of their equipment. This is nonsense. And we, the people, are being fleeced for it through all of these different, not just the Department of Defense and all the different military agencies, but the Department of, and I know you're going to get into some of them, there's a whole laundry list. So this group of people that put this company together is benefiting in the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. And one of the things we do as business owners and people that have run businesses for a long time, we analyze our purchases by ROI, return on investment. I would like to know what the government's return on investment was for these purchases that have been made to Palantir to provide whatever it is, these services that they're doing. It must be something really great. We're in the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, so it must really be something. But if it's all done on a keyboard, I doubt whether you can point to a return on investment. And that's what we, the taxpayers, we, the people who are being fleeced every single day, should be demanding.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great one to call out for that very reason. Like, it seems like not that big of a deal, but it is a big deal because what is this work really even doing? Other than collecting data. I mean, that's a great bonus for everyone involved at the top, for sure, for the simple reason of being able to control us. But everything else, the thing that they're actually supposed to be selling to us is bullshit. These are systems that already are functioning and working. And they go, hey, but what if we just made it a little bit smoother? But is it even smoother? Because, like, half the time, you can't even keep a printer up and running for more than a month. So, what are we doing here? Moving on, and actually, another thing I just want to comment on quickly here, too, is we're talking about a lot of ways that this is being used by the government, because that's, I think, what's most important right now. But remember this other software I mentioned, Foundry, that's used across many infrastructures, or I'm sorry, across many different types of industries, hospitals, banks. So that right there is your health data, your financial records. Like, it matters that these things are being facilitated by the same company. Because even though there are supposedly two separate entities that are never going to touch, there is absolutely no way for us to say with 100% certainty that they're never going to touch. There's just no way.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing about the two industries you mentioned, two very heavily federally regulated industries, medical and banking.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So if it's
true.
something that the federal government's got its mitts on, of course it's going to run through the same company that provides all this other information to us.
Right. Another thing I wanted to touch on here is that there's also literally countless instances where other players that are in like the war game, so factions of the military industrial complex, are working with Palantir on their own government contracts. So General Motors, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. These are just a few that I looked up quickly. I mean, you could probably go down the list and type and Palantir and find a contract, which means that not only is Palantir working directly with these government agencies, but if Lockheed Martin is working with the government, then Lockheed Martin is also paying Palantir to do X, Y, and Z for them to fulfill what they've agreed to do for the government. So quite literally, their tendrils have reached into like every sector of this. And then, the one that we talked about recently that's not related to this kind of like either surveillance. Again, I shouldn't say surveillance, I should say intelligence. It's not on the intelligence side of things and it's not on the military side of things, but still in the government, is the Department of Agriculture. So this was a $300 million deal that is basically giving oversight on the entire, like each farmer is going to have a profile. So this is really interesting because, again, $300 million doesn't sound that bad when you think about the $10 billion contract with the Army. But what they're doing with this tech is compiling all of the data from each farmer. So, they're actual records of, how they're processing the ground, everything from that to their banking records and expenses and all of these things to create a profile for each farmer, to put everything in one place for them, nice and easy. This is the digital ID that we are warning you all about. And it's like they're using the farmer of all people to do a test run. This is what they're literally going to do, presumably to every single one of us, because they're compiling our data right now. So eventually it's going to go somewhere. And what this deal is doing, the Department of Agriculture is forcing it on farmers. I mean, the way that this is going to impact our food in itself is already alarming. And I talked about Halter a couple weeks ago, which was the tech that kind of controlled the cattle as far as movement, things like this, checking for disease, everything like that. I misspoke. I thought that was actually a Palantir technology. It's not. But this is interesting and important because it was backed by Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. And Founders Fund is another whole conversation we could get into because Peter Thiel started his own venture capital firm. So there are many other billionaires that are in this Founders Fund group that are deeply investing in companies like this. Some of them are, not what you would consider to be a big deal to your daily life. Like they're invested in Airbnb and I'm sure they're just profiting off of that. And, who knows? There's probably not a lot of weird, sketchy stuff going on there. Or maybe there is. I don't know. But some of them, like this, like Halter and like PayPal, you can see how they can start pulling data that, it's not the same thing. It's a separate company. It's not connected to Palantir, but it kind of is because it has a lot of overlapping people backing it from an investment standpoint.
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to add to that is, to me, the connection to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the farmers more personally, I guess, to the farmers. Let's not lose sight of one of the things we've talked about many times, and that's the globalist agenda of global depopulation. Of course, food is always a big part of that, and food scarcity, which we know has become kind of a hot button topic with the Iran conflict and the blockades and blockades upon the blockades and all of that nonsense going on over there, and the whole food thing going on. Well, somehow, some way, I can't help but make a connection to the discussions about food scarcity, and now all of the farmers, or the majority of big farmers, industrial farmers, are going to have all of their wonderful benefits run through Palantir, which incidentally happens to be connected to every military industrial complex company on the face of the earth. So to me, it just draws a straight line back to that end result that we know there are very wealthy people and very small group of people that are interested in achieving an end, and food would certainly be part of that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's, I mean, you can make so many jumps to where this could go. That in itself, right? Like, okay, yeah, sure, the military industrial complex, they're always doing bad stuff. So you hear that and maybe it's not that interesting to you personally, but this one should touch you because it will touch you. It will impact your life. So this one, you can see how that one really should mean something. Whether or not it does, who knows? But last couple things I wanted to touch on as far as things they're doing currently. The CIA, the FBI, and the NSA have been using Palantir tech for years. Of course, the CIA has, because they were a big part of why they started, right? But the degree to which they are using their tech is not readily available. And of course, you know, national security reasons, they never are airing out the kind of things that they're spending money on. But it is known that their tech is in place to some degree. So just, again, the NSA don't love this, right? We shouldn't love that this same technology is being used in places like that. The last thing, though, that is important is the Pentagon's 2027 budget proposal includes an estimated $58.5 billion that's tied to artificial intelligence, 2.3 of which would be used for Palantir's Maven software across military branches. This is one that it has implemented for many years, particularly in the Air Force, I believe. But it's just sort of been like experimental tech with the military. Writing $2.3 billion worth of agreement into the 2027 budget tells us it's not experimental anymore. It's going to be implemented full scale. So super important. I want to get into where Palantir is going, what they believe the future is. I know that we're already kind of running short on time, so I'll try to make it quick. Is there anything else you want to touch on before I jump into that?
No, that's good. Let's keep rolling. Yeah.
All right, cool. So according to Palantir, as I mentioned, they are not harvesting your information. Their platforms only allow organizations to better manage the data they already lawfully control. So Palantir claims that they can't see what the company can see. So like if you at your business are using Palantir to simplify things, Palantir says, I can't see any of that. I have a hard time believing that for the very reason that, like, if I'm using a very basic software on my computer and I call the customer service, most of those customer service companies have the ability to remote view your screen when you give them access. Yep. So no, I'm not buying that they have no way to see that. That's an absurd claim. Let's assume that's true, though. Palantir itself doesn't have to be the one spying on you directly to be sinister. It can be sinister because it is building the tools and giving them to the government and to different entities to allow that spying to happen. So whether or not they have any involvement in the surveillance doesn't matter. It's not what makes them evil. Another thing I want to say about where the future of Palantir is going. There have allegedly been over a dozen ex-Palantir staffers who have come out to blow the whistle on the company in different capacities, with one having, again, allegedly said that Palantir has aimed to take over many of these agencies for many years, which is why we're now seeing them deeply embedded. And this person claims that we are already an occupied nation. And we've heard this before by, Israel and so on. But what this person who supposedly worked at Palantir is saying is that our government is occupied by Palantir and those in charge of Palantir. And when you think about it that way, it does make a lot of sense with the choices that our government has made over the last several years. Because if that's true, you can see why some of these choices would have been made and how certain things would have happened. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I wanted to get into before wrapping all of this up is the manifesto posted by Alex Karp, the CEO, on X. So I'm going to kind of close with that. The one thing that I did want to mention before doing that is that something that's interesting and an idea that I've been hearing related to these concepts is that when you have this level of like surveillance kind of coming down on you, you it is very similar to what Brant and I think talked about last week to some degree, that self-censorship. And this is what we're seeing happen in real time. And I think we'll continue to see it on a much larger scale as we start to recognize how much we are being watched. When we have watchers all the time, people are always watching what we're doing, the choices that we make, who we're talking to, everything. We will start self-policing. People will adjust their lifestyle, the things that they do, the things that they say, even the things that they think. So the government doesn't have to come up to you and put a ball and chain around your ankle. They don't have to physically do that to enslave you. By the knowledge of these people watching you all the time, you will enslave yourself. And I think that's an important concept here, because these are the exact threats that George Orwell warned about. The exact threats that Edward Snowden promised were coming down the pike. And now we're seeing it all happen in real time. And if people do not wake up to this idea of what's happening and start getting actually mad about it, we're not going to change any of this before it's quite literally too late. Because if Palantir is already controlling our government, and it seems like that could be the case when you look at just how involved they really are, there's not a lot left for us to do, in truth.
I think that's the case. I think because the majority has been so numbed and dumbed down that they refuse to stand up and push back about anything, they will simply accept that this is all being done for their best interest. While there is a digital and a literal cage being built around them, and all semblances of freedom and liberty are gone, and we will be the minions performing a basic task for the few and the special few. And I think that's ultimately what all this is. Or maybe it's a play. Maybe there's the folks that control this company and some of the other big tech companies that seem to have a pretty good grip on the way this country is being run. Maybe that's all part of that inner circle cabal. Maybe it's all controlled by Israel. I don't know, but there certainly seems to be a lot of things that point back toward the thing that we've talked about many, many times. Our government is not answering to the people. It is not anything close to what they all swore they were going to uphold, defend, and preserve, and that very fine document that described how we were supposed to be governed. There's nowhere close to that. But since the majority just plods along and accepts it, we are left with the small percentage that we're going to have, and that's what we're going to end up fighting with. We're going to, because the rest simply are going to walk themselves into the pen. But this was very interesting because the tentacles of this particular group reach so far throughout our private life and government. All the big government agencies already have spent millions and billions of dollars buying into Palantir. So somebody's, first of all, getting awfully rich, but more importantly than that, somebody is getting an extreme amount of control and knowledge. And if somebody knows what you do, what your habits are, and all of those things, that digital profile you guys talked about, they can control you. And that's ultimately what it appears to me the biggest threat.
Yeah, I think that's why this conversation is so important. You touched on Israel for a moment there, and I just want to say this too. Our government is not the only government that Palantir is this involved with. Israel is also one of them. And many others, actually. Not to the level that, they're involved in our government and then Israel's, but they are involved in many governments around the world, which says also to me, is this not the one world government, the new world order that we have been professing, that your generation has been professing since, well before I could even understand the concept? If we have an entity that's controlling all of these governments, we don't need to replace all the governments and make them one, because they're already being controlled by one thing. That is a one world government.
That's correct. Yep.
So this should be so frightening, because when we think about it that way, we have to recognize and we have to put ourselves in the mindset that we're already there. we're already at the one world government stage. So what do we do now? What's our reaction now? That should change the way that we respond to some of this stuff. Last thing I want to do is quickly go through this X post from Alex Karp because it's directly tied to this idea of a one world government. He wrote a book called The Technological Republic, and he recently posted on X with 22 points basically summarizing this. Now, first of all, the Technological Republic in the name should give you pause. That's already pretty unnerving and the opposite of what we're trying to do here. So basically, just to quickly kind of wrap up what he talked about, he claims that Silicon Valley owes a debt to the nation. He reinforces the need for AI weaponry at war. So that's the debt. Silicon Valley, exists because of our government, our country, our people. So we need to be pushing AI weaponry. Big tech needs to be getting more involved with the defense of this country. So he insists that tech companies have a role to play in addressing crime as well. Perfect. He calls for required military service by all. Not bringing back a draft. No. If there's a war, you're going. He says that the only way for a free and democratic society to prevail is the use of software-driven hard power. That means military force.
Mm-hmm.
He says that public servants need not be our priests. I think this one is implying maybe we shouldn't take the words of our public servants as Bible, which I could agree with if it were anyone else saying it. But I think in this case, we have to ask Alex Karp, if not them, then who? Who are you implying we should be listening to? Because I don't think he's, that tied to any spiritual faction. I don't think that's what he's saying here.
Yep.
He kind of continues to condemn people in politics while claiming that we need to show more grace for people living in the public sphere, implying that there are elite groups who deserve different treatment, just not the government. So again, I ask, who? If it's not the government that you think we should be, treating as an authority figure or as giving any certain exceptions to, then who are you talking about? It implies an elite group to me. Who are they? Alex, we're dying to know.
Mm-hmm.
He also makes some weird comments about how too many of us have never known a world war, and follows that by saying we need to stop the neutering of Germany and Japan. So, what's happening there? That whole thing is crazy.
But here is a person who can speak in very disjointed, crazy terms, but probably has as much influence on how our government works as any other individual in this country. And that is extremely concerning. But yeah, as you guys mentioned last week, I think you did a great job. If we're not talking about it, if we're not out and discussing in our friend group and people who we associate with these kind of things, if we're keeping them to ourselves or even more importantly, and probably more so connected to the largest part of society, we're much more enamored with the football draft and whatever all the other nonsense is going on, instead of looking at the cage that has been built around us to control us and ultimately to get rid of us if we become too much of a thorn in the side. This is what we should be focusing on. But unfortunately, I don't know. We've been screaming from the mountaintops for 30 years. And, there does appear to be some additional interest coming from the younger folks. And that's what I'm hanging my hat on, that your group and down is going to say, nope, we're not participating. And that's the greatest thing. I was thinking of that the other night, listening to you guys talk. One of the things I am so happy about and so proud of is that you guys, meaning my three kids, have kind of disconnected yourself from where the herd's going. And I always said, get outside, get away from the herd, because the herd is only interested, like you guys talked about TikTok last week and those other things where everybody just wants to be doing what everybody else is doing. And the whole idea of individualism has been squashed. And now it's this collectivism type of society. And that is so dangerous because nobody's looking outside the group. We're all looking at each other to make sure we're still doing what the other ones are doing. Nobody's looking outside the group to see where the threats are coming from. And I'm so happy that you and the friend groups that you have and others are individuals and have stepped away from what society generally has become enamored with, because that is so threatening. It is so big a part of our life, and most of the folks don't even recognize what is being foisted upon us. So anyway, great job preparing all that information for tonight. I think you certainly gave me and hopefully our listeners some things to really be thinking about.
Yeah, like I said, I barely scratched the surface. I mean, this is such a big conversation. The depths to which they are involved in our government and others around the world is something we can only speculate with the information available to us. There's a lot here, don't get me wrong, but it's not all of it.
Of course.
Which means it's worse than it looks.
Yeah.
And we have to take that seriously because it is a threat. We can't always be talking about, the terrorist overseas when the terrorists are here.
Yeah. Yeah. Much more real of a threat, for sure. Yeah.
Yes. And impacting us in our daily lives.
Sure.
And that will only continue to get worse. So a real threat that we should take seriously, that we should look into. This is just an intro, really, into the deep dive. It's a deep dive into Palantir, but only an intro, really, into that. So, yeah, go and do your own research, as always. Sharpen your critical thinking skills. Oh, my God. It is a skill. I recognize that. Like, sharpen it in any way possible, because that is the skill that is going to be most important as we go through these next 5, 10, 20 years living in a techno-fascist state. So that's all I've got. Thanks for joining me along the way as I kind of breeze through my outline I prepared there. If there's nothing else from you, I'll let you close us out.
No, it's great. I'm glad you did a lot of research. I had dug some things up, but basically you covered all the points that I had dug up, and it's certainly a topic that's easy to come back to again, and hopefully we have some feedback from others that may be listening to the show. So until next time, our Bible verse tonight: evildoers do not understand what is right, but those who seek the Lord understand it fully. Better the poor whose walk is blameless than the rich whose ways are perverse. And that also comes from Proverbs. That's 28, verse 5 and 6.
Awesome. Great verse. Thanks, Pops.
Okay, good seeing you.
Likewise. For everybody else, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.
Stay vigilant.
Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.